Imagine an 82-year-old man sprinting from one side of a stadium stage to the other for more than 2 hours, singing every lyric, entertaining tens of thousands of fans, and showing more energy than performers half his age. It sounds unbelievable. Yet that is exactly what Mick Jagger continues to do. More than 6 decades after the Rolling Stones first burst onto the music scene, Jagger remains one of the most electrifying frontmen in rock history. His legendary stage presence has become every bit as iconic as the band's music itself. As the Rolling Stones prepare to release their latest album, Foreign Tongues, Jagger has opened up about creativity, aging, the loss of Charlie Watts, working with today's biggest artists, and the surprisingly simple philosophy that has helped him keep going for over 60 years. There is no miracle cure, no secret formula. One of the first things Jagger reveals is something that sounds almost impossible to believe. Sometimes he has to remind himself not to move on stage. Yes, the man famous for never standing still actually has to tell himself to slow down. When you're singing a ballad, he explains, you have to stand still. I tell myself, you're not moving, just move your arms. For Mick Jagger, movement is instinctive. Anyone who has ever seen the Rolling Stones live knows exactly what he means. He struts, dances, points, twists, spins, and covers every inch of the stage almost without thinking. It's simply part of who he is. Only a few years ago, many believed the Rolling Stones were approaching the end. The death of Charlie Watts felt like the closing chapter of one of rock's greatest stories. The band's legendary drummer had been there since the beginning, forming the iconic core alongside Mick Jagger, KeithRichards, and Ronniewood. Their 60th anniversary tour seemed like the perfect moment to say goodbye. Instead, something remarkable happened. Rather than slowing down, the Rolling Stones entered one of the most productive periods of their entire career. After more than a decade without a new studio album of original material, they released Hackneyed Diamonds in 2023 to widespread critical acclaim. Now they have followed it up with Foreign Tongues, their second album in just 3 years. According to Jagger, the revival happened because the band finally admitted something to themselves. For a long time, they had simply become too relaxed. They had stopped pushing themselves. Everything changed when they sat down together before making Hackneyed Diamonds. Mick Jagger proposed a straightforward plan. Change the producer, set a firm deadline, start writing properly again, rehearse seriously, treat the band like they had something to prove once more. That renewed focus completely transformed their creative process. Despite their new momentum, one absence is still deeply felt: Charlie Watts. Mick Jagger admits that losing Charlie changed everything. After spending virtually an entire lifetime together, there are still moments when he instinctively expects to see Charlie sitting behind the drum kit. Sometimes, he says, he almost imagines Charlie is still there. The hardest moment came when the Rolling Stones stepped onto the stage with another drummer for the very first time. For decades, that had been unimaginable. It felt strange. It felt emotional. But eventually they learned how to continue while honoring the memory of their lifelong friend. The band's latest album also highlights their willingness to embrace new generations of musicians. Mick Jagger also insists he still pays close attention to today's music. He also recalls an important lesson from David Bowie. Bowie constantly wanted to know what was happening in contemporary music, but Jagger points out that keeping up with everything is almost impossible. There's simply too much music. And, as he jokingly admits, plenty of it isn't particularly good, but he never feels pressured to follow fashion. When discussing modern rock music, Jagger mentions the band Geese as one of the groups that caught his attention. Initially, he expected them to sound like a fairly conventional indie rock band. Instead, he discovered something far more experimental. It wasn't what he expected, but he admired their willingness to take risks. He also praises Rosalia, describing her work as highly conceptual, ambitious, and genuinely original. To him, her music proves that artists can still surprise audiences by pushing creative boundaries. Even after more than 60 years in the industry, he remains genuinely curious about what younger artists are creating. Another major collaboration on foreign tongues sees Paul McCartney playing bass. Mick Jagger reflects warmly on their decades-long friendship. Mick Jagger describes Paul as the polite Beatle. John Lennon, he says, was probably the one he felt closest to personally. George Harrison was quieter but could be sharply witty. And, as Jagger laughs, Ringo is Ringo. Although he and Paul have been friends since the 1960s, this was surprisingly the first time McCartney had played bass on one of his recordings. Jagger also fondly remembers the famous recording session when both John Lennon and Paul McCartney sang backing vocals on a Rolling Stones track at Olympic Studios. Back then, there were no elaborate marketing campaigns or carefully planned collaborations. Musicians simply happened to be in the same studio and helped each other because they genuinely enjoyed making music together. When asked who taught him the most about performing live, Jagger doesn't hesitate. According to Jagger, little Richard taught him that performing isn't just about singing songs. It's about making every member of the audience feel involved. It's about creating a shared experience. Another huge influence was James Brown. Whenever Brown performed in New York, Jagger would attend multiple shows. He watched every movement, every expression, every interaction with the audience. For Jagger, every performance became another lesson. Naturally, one question everyone wants answered is this: how does Mick Jagger maintain the fitness required for such demanding concerts? His answer is refreshingly straightforward. He walks a lot. Before every major tour, he rehearses on a practice floor roughly the same size as the concert stage. For weeks, he performs the entire show while constantly moving. Because the real challenge isn't simply walking, it's breathing. Singing requires breath control. Running around a stage also requires breath control. Learning how to balance both is one of the biggest physical challenges of every performance. His training also resembles high-intensity interval exercise, short bursts of explosive movement, brief pauses, then constant movement all over again, exactly what happens during a Rolling Stones concert. In recent years, the world has become fascinated by longevity. Mick Jagger exercised regularly. Avoid excessive drinking, avoid excessive drug use, especially as you get older. Jagger says he began leaving his wilder lifestyle behind when he reached about 40. Not because someone forced him to, because he realized his body could no longer recover the way it once had. Eventually, unhealthy habits catch up with everyone. At the same time, he's realistic. Living healthily doesn't guarantee a long life. You can exercise every day, eat perfectly, avoid alcohol and drugs, and still become seriously ill. There are no guarantees. The only thing anyone can do is give themselves the best possible chance. As Jagger puts it, you're just doing the best you can. After all these years, Mick Jagger isn't obsessed with his own legacy. He's far more interested in the next rehearsal, the next recording session, the next concert. More than 60 years after the Rolling Stones began their incredible journey, Mick Jagger continues to prove that age is only a number. Not because he possesses some magical secret to longevity, but because he never stopped learning, never stopped moving, never stopped creating, and never lost his curiosity. Perhaps, in the end, that is the greatest secret of all.